So yes, we are from California. I don't know if you guys saw the Academy Awards last night or watched the news, but if we offend you in any way, please do not rush the stage. Come talk to us afterwards. Come talk to us afterwards. We're very friendly, but that is not a norm in California. So yeah, my name's John Cleary. This is Anthony Muñoz. We're out of the LA, San Diego division of DPR. You can see we have 28 offices in North America. I'm out of the LA office. Anthony's out of the San Diego office, actually. I have a background in civil engineering. I've been in construction for 8 years. In civil engineering, 3 before that. I was up in San Francisco for 3, and then I've been down in LA for the last 6. I'm actually on the self-perform side of project management at DPR. I specialize in production tracking and production management and understanding production, a lot of math, and that's what really excites me. But please today, so we have a parking lot. So if you have any questions on any key phrases that we have or anything that you guys want to talk about afterwards, please, we'll put it on the parking lot. We have some time at the end of the presentation to talk about that. And then we have the plus delta as well. So if you have anything that you think we can improve on or anything that you really appreciated, maybe write that down so we can go back to that at the end of our presentation. With that, I'll hand it over to Anthony.
Thanks, Bud. Before I introduce myself, I want to give a special thanks to Dean Reed. Dean Reed is a godfather of lean practices in the States, and much of what we're going to be discussing is rooted in his studies. My name is Anthony Muñoz. I'm trying my darndest to stay away from that photo because that's 5 years. It's like a before and after situation going on. More hair, but I'm owning it. Jada Pinkett style, if you will. What you need to know about me, first and foremost, I'm the father of 2 amazing little boys. So for their benefit, I'm going to find the camera and say hi, Julian and Jaden. They saw my last presentation that was on YouTube, and they thought I was a superstar. So I have to milk this while I can. But I really don't want to talk too much about myself. The download, I've been in the industry 18 years. 12 of those years I've been immersed in, practicing, learning, and teaching about collaborative practices. But it's not about me today. I want to focus on someone else, and I would like for you guys to do the same thing. This is a callback to our last discussion that we had 3 years ago. If you see, much like the lean philosophy, this photo focuses on the craftsman and the environment in which they live. But for a moment, I'm going to ask you guys to change your focus. Let's not think about the craft. I want you to ask yourself, who the hell took that photo? I mean, that's a real life photo up on a skyscraper. And this gentleman here to my left or right is Charles Ebbett. And he is known as the Dapper Daredevil. He is the photographer that has gone relatively unknown until 2003 when he was finally given credit for taking that shot. Now, he's since been heralded as someone that went out to the field. He went and saw. And he had the ability to now frame a perspective that we had not known before. He went to the craftsmen, met them on the front lines, and he has an amazing story to tell. Now, I'm asking for you guys to relate to this photo. I'm not asking you to go out on a skyscraper, right? But if you think about it, we are not the craftsmen. We are the Dapper Daredevils. Our shoes are a little bit cleaner, but we have the responsibility to going out to the field, to understanding the environment that we're trying to now progress. All right, and we can't do that from our desks. So I'm asking you guys to engage in a little exercise for me. Let's forget meeting rules for just a moment. And if you have a phone, pull it out. John, come over here too. We're going to start framing the picture. And what I'd like for you guys to do in your best smile, whether it's a friend or by yourself, I want you to take a selfie, okay? And then engage me and John as we take a selfie with all of you guys in the background. This is for due cause. Let's go.
Gonna do?
Yeah, well, he's got longer arms, so I'll let him do it. Let's go. Say cheese. Thanks, guys. We'll come back to this, I promise you. What I want to say, oh, no phones. This discussion is rooted in the philosophy of lean, whether it's construction or other. It's rooted in continuous improvement. And I hope that through our discussion, you will listen to our experiences and you will see how we learn from both positive and negative experiences and leverage them to learn, leverage them to get a little better with each iteration. I want to frame our discussion, and we're going to continue the dialogue that Dean and I started so many years ago. We introduced the simple framework at that time, which is Dean and crew's roadmap of how do we achieve integrating project delivery. We want to offer you guys some key examples from practice so that it's not just theory. You can see how we've forwarded in the field. We then want to have an opportunity to talk. We want to hear your thoughts, as John had mentioned. If you guys have a question throughout, feel free. I'm much better at having conversation than I am dictating. So I would love to entertain the questions as we go. If we can't, we'll go ahead and throw them on the parking lot, and we'll circle back at the end. Then I want to have a moment of reflection, which I'm very much the hippie soft guy, and I enjoy that to learn the deeper lesson. Then we'll have a plus delta, and we'll wrap this up. But let's understand why we're here in the first place. I think as your organization and multiple organizations can attest to, something's not going on correctly out there. We're hitting roadblock after roadblock, despite all of our best efforts, right? I actually admire the level of networking and integration that you guys have here to address this issue, and I wish we can take that back to the States. But we're here for a reason, because projects are long, they're difficult, and even if we've done it before, the next project might present new challenges, even though it shouldn't, right? And the reason being is our behaviors are programmed to work in our own best interests, right? So in order for us to continue integrating, we need to change our behaviors. This is a great quote that I've reflected on before. One of the reasons for the industry's lack of productivity is the fact that construction today has an inherently combative nature compared to the early days of industry. I reflected back before that 100 years ago, we had what are called master builders. And master builders were designers and builders in one wheelhouse. They didn't have the multiple channels of communication that we have today. They didn't have the complex nature of the projects that we have today to jump over these hurdles. They answered their own questions. They took their own directives, and they made things happen in the field. But as we know, things are much more complicated, and rightfully so. Technology's advanced. Our specialties have become more concentrated, which we need, but we still need to have that same level of open communication. So let's look at why we're programmed to be combative. When we look at traditional delivery, our teams are fragmented. As I mentioned, we're working in our own or for our own interests. Processes are linear. Risk is managed individually, again, for our own sakes. Compensation, again, individually pursued. We all have our own contracts. We all have our own payouts. And at the end of the day, as managers, it's our responsibility to manage those budgets. Communications, well, much more virtual these days, right? But back in yesteryear, we had RFIs that we would send by paper or mail, right? Even the electronic version, you send an RFI or a submittal, and it goes through a ping pong of personnel, right? To get finally back to you eventually, and hopefully with ideal results. But if not, you have to go through that process again. Our agreements and contracts, again, support this behavior and the behavior that is self-preservation. We're out for our own interests. Now, I understand there are some new lean individuals that don't understand what this results in the field. Now, this data, I'm sure that all of you guys have seen. It's the one that we all resort to. It's about 10 years out of practice, and I like to believe we've made a trend in the correct direction, but we'll see. If you compare construction to other non-farming labor productivity organizations, think manufacturing, we're at a decline of 19%, whereas they have increased 153%. Now you ask yourself why. I think the quick answer is if you look at Toyota, and the lean processes that they've adopted and spread throughout the industry to really empower the lowest level worker to help make decisions when problems present has played a large part in that. And that's actually where lean construction has taken a lot of its identity. Now, the difference, though, is manufacturing is fairly predictable, right? If you're making a Mercedes-Benz, you know what model, you know it has 4 tires, right? You know all of this. It doesn't really change that often. So to do lean manufacturing processes, fairly easy, fairly predictable, again. But in construction, as I mentioned, even if you're building the exact same building from that corner of the stage to that corner of the stage, something could be different. Maybe it's the soil, right? Maybe it's the team that's building it. Maybe it's the architecture team. Maybe it's the owner's representative. But something enough is different that it changes the complete dynamic of the project. Now, compared to integrating project delivery, we promote a more collaborative practice, a more openly communicated practice, one in which we manage and share risk and reward equally. And at the end of the day, when we're working together and for each other, we trust each other. That's the ideal that we like to strive for. Now, the parallel that I like to make is if you were running a relay race, right? 4 legs, think of running in track, and you didn't trust the person that you were going to hand off the baton to, you're going to fumble. Or you might hold on. Or you might try to run twice as far because you don't think he's going to do it the right way. But at the end of the day, if you trust everybody to run their position and you efficiently hand off that baton and give them the time and space that they need to make their moves, you're going to always beat that one person, right? So we want to spread the risk, spread the reward, reap the benefits together. Now, what are these benefits? I'm not going to break it down, but we've got multiple components of what collaborative nature results in and the incremental improvements that each of those components might lend to. Now, when it's all said and done, you could see nearly a 40 to 50% improvement in your productivity on the field. Now, numbers have since proved that. We've got many of studies that show that when you work in a collaborative effort, you will reap those benefits. And I think a couple of our case studies are going to highlight that. Now, you might ask, how do we get there? So this is the recap of our discussion from 2018 now, where Dean Reed introduced the Simple Framework. The Simple Framework is a product of examining case study projects that were highly successful and trying to understand what they did to accomplish that. You guys, I believe you had mentioned 45 or so guidelines, and Dean tried to narrow it down to, I think, 7 or 8 or so. Keep it very simple. Now, the challenge with being simple is that this is a recommendation, a suggestion, right? And there's no exact prescription as to how you accomplish what we believe is the end goal. So let's learn about what that end goal is, but let me explore the 4 components of the simple framework, rather. We're going to discuss the elements of integration and how they are interconnected. We're going to discuss the tools that facilitate this integration and why they're necessary. And then lastly, we're going to, again, touch on some case studies that present the proof of the pudding, if you will. Now, this is what the simple framework looks like. This is our roadmap. On the bottom, you'll see the levels of integration. And on the top, the components or tools that we use to achieve this integration. So what I'd like to do, much like the last planner system, is we're going to start at the end and work our way to the beginning, right? And at the end of a project, we desire a high-performance building. So what defines a high-performance building? You know, as I'm saying this, I hear Dean in my head, like, got to be buildable, operable, sustainable. Let me tell you what this means. Buildable. It's got to be easy to build. It's got to make sense to build. It's got to be buildable on paper. What I mean by that is we've got some very prominent architects. I'm thinking of Frank Gehry, who would often design his buildings in the shape of motion. I don't even know what that means, right? They're amazing to look at, but I know that with a small background in structural engineering, that it's nearly impossible to do sometimes what he's asking. He was so prominent that he can just say, figure it out. Nowadays, we've got to challenge each other, right? We respect your end goal, but that's not particularly feasible, or it is feasible, but at an exorbitant cost to the owner. So let's play checks and balances. It's got to be safe. We have to keep the craftsman and their environment in mind. And it has to be constructible using today's methodologies. There's a great story, and I won't go into too much detail, but the Avatar theme park in Disney, are you guys familiar with the Avatar movie, The Floating Mountains? So there's like an Avatar land at Disney, and they had to recreate those floating mountains. And so there's a lot of eccentric loading, right? And so the roots are effectively holding up these giant islands in the air. And they had to basically recreate a way of designing to accomplish what was only done on TV or in movies before. So it's an amazing story. There's case studies out there that I would definitely suggest you look into. And if you don't want to do the reading, then just go to Disney World, right?
Yep.
And do go.
Also an IPD project.
Also an IPD project, yes. These buildings have to be operable as well. All systems have to work together. All operations and maintenance must be manageable and doable in the future. Frank Lloyd Wright, a lot of Franks in the architecture world, but he would make these incredible buildings. I think, is it Falling Water? Mm-hmm. And it was, you know, it's supposed to be designed to mesh right into the woods there and complement the space. And it did such an amazing job. It had a river running right through it. And then it had literally a river running right through it because it flooded. You know, there's water damage continuously to the point where there's constant upgrade of this particular structure, which was a residence. It's now basically a historical landmark. And they spend millions of dollars to keep it from falling into the river. So much like Frank Gehry, he had an amazing vision in mind, but he didn't understand the mechanics or the construction that went into putting that building and making it sustainable and operable in its truest form. And it certainly wasn't usable. It was great to look at the water below and outside the window, not as much when you're trying to watch the Oscars, right? And water's coming right through your living room. And lastly, sustainable, as we should all strive to make sure that we have a future for my sons, your children, future generations. This goes on to integrated systems, all of the components that lead into a highly operable building, high-performing building, rather. Systems must be integrated to program the performance criteria. So an end user has something in mind, and they say, these are my objectives, this is what I find valuable, and we got to make the components or design the components that lend towards that. The building itself, again, unlike Frank Lloyd Wright, must be acclimated to its climate and site, must make sense. The building systems must be integrated to themselves as well. Again, I mentioned that there are many different technical specialties and components of a building, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. In that three, there's probably, 3 dozen more different subcomponents. So there's a lot of communication that has to take place, and none more important than the team members to themselves. Now, how do you facilitate that communication? Well, you design processes that facilitate that communication, such that communication is occurring even when we're not talking with each other, right? So it's happening in the work that we're doing. It's happening in the building plan. And it's happening through us explaining our wants and needs and also constraints. So user value is translated into a design solution. Design solutions inform and enrich user value. They make their lives better. Builder and operator's knowledge inform the design. Again, it has to be buildable. Where do you get that information? From the people building it. Has to be usable. Where do you get that information? From the people that are using it. And again, sustainability concerns must also inform design. We also have to integrate the organization. Now, the organization is not DPR. It's not our competitors. The organization is the group that is building the project, right? We believe at DPR that we have no titles. When we step on to an integrated project, we also believe there's really no companies, right? We create our own company, we create our own bond. And in this, we connect people's actions, information, decision with the end goal, with the program, and what the end users need. To accomplish this, we have to use clear language. I'm going to go on a tangent of a story because it's hilarious to me. We have to understand what we're saying, not like the language barrier that we may have at the moment, but within the project itself. So there's a short story that an electrician comes. He asks the he asks the architect, "I need an elevation. Can you give me this elevation?" The architect looks and says, "Yes, I can give you that elevation." He's like, "Okay, can you give it to me now?" He's like, "Well, no, it's going to take me time to give you that elevation." And so a week goes by, and there's a meeting where they're both there, and he's like, "Where the hell is my elevation?" He's like, "No, I got it." And he pulls out a piece of paper, and it's this beautiful elevation of like a head wall, right? With all the different components of outlets and med gas and light fixtures. And the electrician looks at him and he says, "I just needed an elevation off the ground. Tell me, is it 36 inches or 42 inches, right?" Elevation, they are both right. They are both correct. But because we did not create a common language on the project, or rather, we didn't ask questions when someone said, "I needed elevation," to understand what they were truly after, we created a week's worth of lost work, right? And also frustration, which doesn't help to advance the open communication that we're ultimately after. It also, though, it does promote collective learning, because that's a funny story, and I guarantee you they will never make that mistake again. And lastly, we connect organizations to connect people with the work that they are doing. So I can say from my personal position, I'm a healthcare builder. Pretty much all I build is hospitals. And one thing that's amazing is that I could drive by and I can point to my sons and say, "That's the hospital that Daddy built." And I know it's helping not one people, not two people, communities, and not communities today, generations of communities. And I take a great deal of pride in that. And I hope that everyone takes a great deal of pride in what they're doing every day. But sometimes we need the outside perspective to understand how what we're doing today impacts the future. So it's an important thought. John, you love the idea of silos. You wanted to talk about those. How do we break down silos?
Yeah, so typical processes, right? On a lump sum contract or even a GMP, you might have your foreman come to you with an issue as a project manager. You might have to go to the general contractor with that issue. That general contractor then has to go to the architect. That architect then has to go to the structural engineer if it was a structural issue, and then that just plays a game of telephone. I don't know, is there a term for telephone in Danish?
Telephone.
But anyway, it's a children's game where you whisper down the line and it comes back and it's a different term, right? So that happens all the time in typical contract forms. So what we want to do is break down those silos that I just mentioned and have literally the last planner, the foreman, go talk to the structural engineer. Everyone would be included in the conversation, but you don't have to have that game of telephone.
The reason that's important is because it does what we just highlighted, right? It breaks down the channels of communication. It puts the person that is doing what the work in direct connection with the people that are programming or asking for the work. They understand why they're doing what they're doing, and they understand how they best fit as part of the overall process. Lastly, we want to integrate information. Again, I've already emphasized the use of a common language. We have to make it readily accessible, especially in today's era. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. It's got to be both unique, but also reusable. So unique in that when you are having the conversation and you're talking at the parameters or you're talking the KPIs, that you understand what they mean specifically to that project, but you can then take that overall thought process and apply it to another project. It also has to be based on a source of truth. At the end of the day, trust is the foundation of collaboration. And so if you're not speaking from truth, if you're misleading your partners, you will never establish that trust, and you will never truly be a collaborative group. And the source of truth is not your truth or my truth or your truth or any of our truths. It's the collaborative truth, right? I think of the movie The Matrix. I don't know if you guys remember The Matrix, right? So most films prior to were shot single camera for the most part. You saw it for one perspective. And then in The Matrix, they had that bullet time where they went around. And you truly saw what he was doing almost in 3D, right? You saw the full story. It added such more interesting and engaging component to the story. Well, when you have a round table and you have 10, 20, 30 partners sitting around it, one person could be speaking, as is traditional general contracting, but that's only their voice, right? If you ask the other individuals sitting at the table, they can offer a different perspective, even of the same story, but it enlightens someone across the table. And when you have enough of those conversations, you come up with a source of truth that is yours collectively. And when you have that, you have the opportunity to buy into it and advance it further. Ooh, sorry. Now, we have some common tools that we use to accomplish this. One is the old building plan, right? We have a common language that's identified, glossaries. We also have VDC, which again, you guys are amazing at, and every time I come, I'm always in awe of the technology that you guys are using and also advancing. And at the end of the day, we also have budgets, right? Dollars are very, very, very real. There's a saying, men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. All right, so if the numbers are up, hopefully it's telling a positive story. If the numbers are down, you need to figure out why, because it's telling a negative story. And as managers, I'm sure you guys can relate to that and understand the sensitivity beyond that. Now let's talk about the components that allow for the levels of integration needed for the simple framework. One is measurable value. We just touched on one, which is dollars. But metrics drive an outcome through aligning everybody as to how we measure value, right? What is important to us? Us, again, being the collective. It allows us then numerically and quantitatively to prioritize our goals. It also drives, now that we have these goals, the processes that we might use to achieve these goals. One of these processes would be production management, production tracking, and we're going to tell a little bit of story of that a little bit later. Now, we also would like to take these numbers and plaster them on the walls, which is our visual simulation. I'm also going to call it visual stimulation. And the reason I offer that is because think of, pick a sport. I know we probably have differing favorite sports. I'm going to go with basketball, okay? Michael Jordan, I think everybody knows him. In the last 2 minutes of a game, if he saw a scoreboard that was close, he went into a different gear, right? If he saw it was close, if it was within reach, he turned it up a notch. That's what numbers do. If the numbers are high, we feel good. If the numbers are low, we get creative, right? Now, the challenge there is we let negativity push us. However, if we were to focus and come up with our common language and come up with our common goals and come up with our common process to achieve those goals, why couldn't we allow positivity to fuel us, right? Because why should we be happy with making what we said we would make if we can make more for everybody, right? Whether that's financial or whether that's emotional. Let's not give up just because the numbers look good. Think of opportunities to make the numbers look better. Now, let's talk about some more ideas as to values that we measure. We've got percent complete. That's a schedule measurement. We've got the number of change orders due to conflict. Tells you how good or bad you're doing on a project. You got percentage of budget items within the range of budgeted costs. Again, a managerial conversation. The number of RFIs and the number of rework hours due to errors, right? These are all some easy quantitative measures that we could use to understand how good or not good or areas of opportunity that we can improve on. Now, one of those numbers we find in production management. So to effectively manage production, we have to plan work as a team. and again, not for the team. So a traditional general contractor might say, you need to be here at this date, and you need to be moving at this rate. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been a general contractor 18 years, and I used to give instruction and dictation that I had no idea what I was talking about. All I needed to know was like, what's on my blueprint? I need that done by the date that my superintendent said. Let's figure that out, right? That's how I was raised. That's how I grew up. Production management, when thought of collectively, when thought of as a team, it provides a clear path forward. It creates that common language. You understand why we're doing what we're doing and at what pace we're moving to accomplish that goal. It helps create the big picture strategy. Again, uniting the team. And what we like to do to make sure that we are constantly communicating is every day we check in on how we're doing. Again, we've got a great story to share with you a little bit later on production management as a whole. There is great value in collaboration. That's why we're here, but also co-location. Co-location obviously reduces time to make informed decisions. I shared the story about the electrician and the architect had to leave, whereas maybe if the architect spent an hour more to facilitate that conversation or was there the very next day because they had the same office, maybe that misunderstanding didn't take a week, maybe it only took that day. It improves accuracy. Elevation versus an elevation, right? It also strengthens relationships. I imagine the electrician and the architect, if they were cool enough, might have had a beer to laugh about that afterwards. I have beers and I laugh about them still to this day. And it also supports decision making. When you have the stakeholders and those making decisions within reach, you guys can make decisions on the fly and go through it together. Now, these are the components that facilitate integration. We've got weird times though, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic, and for 2+ years, we were having to stay at home or we were having to stay 6 feet, right? So what does that mean? It pretty much put the damper on co-location. But I don't think it hindered us all that much. In fact, for those of us that were up for the challenge, we've already got virtual design and construction. We've already got VDC. And admittedly, I don't believe it was leveraged to its full extent. And I'm not saying today that it is, but because of our situation, because we were having to work more virtually and understand how to communicate over the computer, I think it truly bolstered the virtual design and construction component. We're seeing a significant amount more of that on our end. Again, I took a lot back from my last trip and things that you guys have shared with me. I like to believe I've influenced it in a positive way, but that's just me taking credit.
He does that a lot.
Yeah. Did you notice he talked a lot more about himself in the introduction? So let's be honest, though. The projects that John and I have been on, for the most part, have been true IPD projects. In an IPD project, means that at the foundation of it, there is an agreement. There is a contract in place that very clearly stipulates that we have shared risks and shared reward. It allocates group responsibility and says that we are all proportionally responsible for whatever the outcome might be. It reduces and allocates liability as well. And going right back to the top, that joint shared risk and reward, if you have that reward that you're chasing, rather, it provides group incentivization, which, again, you're no longer then wanting to work for your own interests because you realize that if you work for your what might have been competing contractors' interests, you can stand to gain as well. But we had those in contract form, right? So if there was ever a disagreement, and fortunately we never had a resolve to it, we can just say, hey, no, like this is what you signed up for, and we can enforce it much like we would do traditionally. But I have been on projects where we haven't had the black and white. We haven't had the contractual law. Rather, we have the relationships, right? And these relationships happen by specific design. You have to be involved in the project early. So as a general contractor, we've got to start employing some of the pre-construction services that John had mentioned, right? And we've got to be involved at the onset so that when a designer is designing, we can comment as to whether or not it's feasible and or constructible. And when we do that, when we engage at the front end, we are able to quantify the risk associated with engaging in any project. And so we can have risk allocation, right? We can share management processes. We will share risk and reward if we agree amongst ourselves. And we can share in the celebration of achieving all of our targets and goals. It is doable. It's hard, but again, I think that's why we're here. So where to start? This is the roadmap. This is the framework. And if you notice, there's really no destination there. It shows you the interrelations. It shows you the components. And on each project, you've got to establish, identify, and prove your own processes. They have to be unique, as I had said, but then also something that you can carry over. So we're going to have our conversation where we share real-life case studies of projects that we've been on, dating back as far as 12 years. And for the most part, those projects have been pretty one after the other, with small gaps of time and small experiences in between them. But again, I hope that while we discuss this, you see where we had shortcomings, you see where we had positive experiences, and you see how we leverage both to make the next project rather, that much better. Now, for those that work with me, and that you guys may have noticed already, again, I like to take deeper moments of reflection. And I want to say that whether or not you have a contract or whether or not you have a team that is all in alignment, team dynamics are key. And the people that you build with are super critical to the outcome of any project. And it can make your work day, your work project that much better. And the one thing that we at DPR say, as you heard John mention, is we exist to build great things. And I believe those great things are the relationships that we build while we're building buildings. And I'll share a little story. See this guy right here? His name's Bobby.
Bobby G.
BG is what we call him. And BG and I, we met in 2011. And it's funny because if you look at us, we don't look like we would relate necessarily. We don't look like we're going to go hang out, but we very much do. With my first son, I came back to work, and Bobby was the first person to buy me a onesie. And it was from the ESPN World, which is in Anaheim, and it said, "Booyah." And what's crazy is I've never even been to ESPN World, but that is so Bobby, like that's his world. And prior to that, I don't feel like we broke down like emotional walls, deeper friendships. And I'm telling you this story nearly 12 years later because Bobby's one of my best friends and mentors. And it's important to me that on every project that I am on, we make connections. And maybe they're not that deep. Maybe he's not providing me the whole wardrobe for all my babies, right? But he's part of my life. And he's going to be part of my past and my future. And my relationship with John is very much the same. Now, John had mentioned that he's in self-perform, and I'm from the general contracting side. So let's say that we didn't have the DPR labels, right? Contractor, subcontractor in some cases. As we all know, working with subcontractors, sometimes that's adversarial. And the truth is, sometimes emotions get adversarial even within the same flag, right? But John and I have managed to kind of leverage and capture each other's passion for what it is that we're doing. And I truly believe that if I make his life easier, better, and he wants to do the same for me, that we can't lose. I would take John on any project. In fact, brought him to Denmark because I believe the truth that he speaks is one that represents the greater. And I'm excited to hear what he has to say. I hope you guys are as well. Now, I think we're pushing right up to the 3 o'clock hour. So this is our bathroom break. So when you guys see this screen, that means you guys could, get up, get some drinks, grab some pastries, and we'll gather back here.
Thank you.